participants. It's a real pleasure to moderate this, for me, to moderate this important panel and to introduce to you some outstanding panel members, outstanding speakers. We too will start with some opening comments by each of our panelists, go with some questions to each of the panelists, and then opening up to you for discussion. The topic of this panel is one where all of us, no matter where we are, in which country, which institution, all of us can still learn a great deal and can still make more progress. The topic is how to grow leadership opportunities for women in science and entrepreneurship. Of course, some countries are doing better than others. Some institutions have made progress. But all of us have a long way to go to achieve what we would like to achieve, which is a balanced leadership team in institutions. We are truly lucky to, and it's maybe not luck, but choice, to have the panel of these 4 women who have agreed to share with you and with all of us their experience and offer some suggestions for the future. We have asked them to look at some of the challenges they have met, but also some of the opportunities, both in terms of policy and in terms of practice. We would like them to reflect on the realities that they have experienced in their careers. I'm going to introduce all of them very, very briefly, but you will find, and I will tell you on which page in the program book you will find their biographies. Our first speaker is Dr. Ayman Al-Mutairi. She's the Assistant Deputy Minister for His Excellency, the Minister of Commerce and Investment. She is also holding several other roles. She's currently the head of the Human Capabilities Development Program Office, which is a flagship program of the Vision 2030 program. Her biography is on page 59, and I underline, it's a brief synopsis of her achievements. But I'd like her to start with her opening comments, and then I'll introduce the next speaker.
Thank you very much. And I don't think this is working. Maybe you can take this? This is not working either. Can you hear me? Yeah, this is working? Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you all for attending this session. We're hoping to make it an exciting session. We have a deal that we've struck together that we're not going to be boring, we hope, and we're going to talk a little bit about our personal experiences as well. But let me just, give a very quick introduction of why am I here today. I'm here for many reasons, but I'm here to set a model for my daughter, to be honest, and for all our daughters. We have worked hard. I think in our era, we went through different phases of the kingdom developing. We went through, we're not allowed to go out, we're not allowed to speak in public, we're not allowed even to go out and study alone, into this era where I'm sitting here and talking to all of you. And the change has happened very rapidly and very, very fast. I'm very proud to be here. I hope I can add something to the women entrepreneurship and to the women leadership in this kingdom. I hope to set a model for my daughter and all the girls that are working for me in the office in my different hats. But it's not only that, but it's the change that we're about to bring through to this society. It's about what we can add to the vision. How can we contribute to this vision and contribute very seriously to the vision. It is our responsibility to make that change and leapfrog the society into the next era.
Very much. Our second speaker is Catherine or Kitty Didion, who is the Executive Director of WEPAN, which is Women in Engineering Proactive Network in the USA. She also has a long history of working in universities and colleges, including in the very famous Olin College of Engineering. Kitty?
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this panel and to have a conversation on such an important topic. I would like to first talk about, in my perspective, how the growing opportunities for all in science and engineering, men and women, are changing. We're moving from, I think the previous panel addressed it somewhat, from a knowledge economy to thinking about what we do in terms of a maker economy and in terms of what we think about how we create science and engineering. So when we talk about growing leadership opportunities for women, we have to acknowledge that the experience for all is changing, so how we think about it and frame it must change. The second thing I would say is when we think about what we want to transform ideas. The U.S. Business Higher Education Forum said that innovation and its excellence is transforming ideas to services, to products, and to driving change. So how we drive that change today is different for all of us. Women have to be part of that solution, but we have to acknowledge that that change is happening for all of us on this planet. My second point I would like to make is that when we think about how we educate to create innovators, that too has changed. I worked for 10 years at the U.S. National Academy of Engineering, and they recently published a book called Educate to Innovate. And they talked about the importance of creativity, of the interface of disciplines, but also the willingness to take risks. And I think those topics, particularly the willingness to take risk, often have a gendered component that we don't discuss. How do we create opportunities for women to have those same experiences as the men in their research so they can be part of our economy as well? And one example I would give you is that there was a very interesting publication by Gerhard Sonner at Harvard where he looked at recipients of the U.S. National Science Foundation fellowships and what they did. And he found that the male and female recipients had different experiences in their comfort level of taking risks. And taking risks can be going outside your discipline, and it can be collaborating with a different collaborator. But I think we have to acknowledge that even the components of education to innovate may have a gendered impact that we have to recognize. So knowing that, how do we grow leadership opportunities for women? And I just want to make 3 quick points in my time. The first is we have to be intentional. If we don't measure it, if we don't understand it with explicit goals or targets, how will we know when we succeed? How can we celebrate success? And we have to have the acknowledgement that we have to do this at all levels. In some of the materials for the conference, I saw an acknowledgement that at many universities in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, women are now increasing numbers at the assistant professor level. But we also need to know what happens to them at the full professor level, what happens to them at the chair, what happens to them in terms of heads of institutions. And we have to have that knowledge in order to know where our resources can have impact. In the US, this has been something that's been very hard, frankly, for us to do, measuring consistently and having that data. But that's the first thing we have to do. I know quotas are very controversial. I will say some institutions have done well by giving additional resources to encourage the hiring and recruiting of diverse faculty, but I think we have to acknowledge we have to have that information. The second thing I would like to recommend is we need to foster networks across institutional organizations. We think of science often as being knowledge or a discipline, but don't recognize the human aspect or the human engagement that we need for discovery and innovation. I have a colleague at Georgia Tech Julia Melkers, who has studied now the networks of men and women globally. And she has found that the networks for women in science and engineering are less robust in terms of the global collaborators, and they often have what she would call a singular node, a very important person in their network, that if something happens to that person in their network is no longer viable. So what can we be doing to helping our women scientists and researchers become leaders by having a better network? Are there things regionally that the kingdom could be doing? I know the Minister of Education from the UAE today spoke about twinning and collaboration, but maybe thinking about how we could foster networks would be very important for our women researchers. And finally, innovation demands teamwork. No one does creativity and innovation alone today. So how do we foster teams that are different in terms of discipline, gender? We know by research that diverse teams are more effective. But what are the mechanisms that we can provide to allow students and researchers to experience that? I just spent 2 years at Olin College of Engineering. The average Olin student, when they graduate, has worked on 25 projects, sometimes with people they really didn't like. But they learned how to work together. What can we be doing to help foster that? Are there ways that the kingdom can support potential engagement across institutions? MIT has just collaborated now with Dassault Systems to create a fab lab where both faculty and students can spend a couple months together. But are there ways that we can think about how we can do this, diverse teams? I think that the opportunities are great. I think there are opportunities to allow women to help grow the kingdom in a way that can be sustainable and make sense, but I think it takes looking at change and how we do it in a very different way. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your starting comments, and we'll come back to several points that you've made, and one of them being the intentional characteristic of change. I think the Vision 2030 has an intention to raise the workforce in Saudi Arabia from 20% to 30% for women. I think it would be interesting to have your views on whether that's ambitious enough, and being part of the workforce is not quite the same as being the leadership. And we're talking about leadership opportunities. And there's probably no one better than our next speaker to talk about that, because Dr. Haifa Jamal Al-Lel, I only know her as Haifa, and I've known her for some time, is the president of the EFAT University in Jeddah. And she's outspoken and knowledgeable, and the floor is yours, Haifa.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وأزكى التسليم. I'll start by saying or add to what Iman said. I think nothing drives Saudi women for leadership position more than her passion, her focus, her sheer determination of what is important for us really to drive the whole country forward, especially for Saudi females. Their passion is not really about how to do their career for their own sake. It's also how to really lead the whole generation, of females, inshallah, in Saudi Arabia to be in leadership position. And this is where I want to really focus on in my presentation or in my talk. A lot of things happened to Saudi female recently from different aspects, socially, professionally. We're really in a golden era. And I think with that kind of foundation that we set, my generation, I think she's not the same generation, she's younger, this is really the whole, 50 years over the past, really we established the foundation for Saudi women. Now it is really time for the new generation to be more than only participate in the workforce. They should lead. They should be part of the boardroom. When I look at some of the statistics that's really available, it's not a lot, but we need to do more. This is one of the homework that we should do, is to look at the number of female that participate in the boardroom. A very small number. Some of the research that's been done says 7% in the whole Saudi Arabia. Some of it even, they said it's 0.1% of the business sector. And we see a lot of talented women, and this is really untapped resources, untapped human capital that we should really be part and proud of. And we should not really only look at, yes, they need to participate, but the participation and the vision of 2030 is to participate heavily between 22 to 30, making it 30% participation is okay. But more than this, we need to have more participate in the boardroom. I'm saying this because it's at this moment different perspectives and different kind of a high-level decision-making bodies. It's important really to tackle both issues, male and females, without looking at both needs and both genders is not going to happen the advancement. So it's very important to have the voices of the women, the voices of the female, the Saudi female, and these different boards. There are some obstacles, there are some challenges that they will face, the new generation and us, but we need to put hands together in how to advance this kind of a leadership, female in the leadership position, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will ask you more questions and get you to think about some of those obstacles and how to remove them later. Our last speaker is Dr. Heather Metcalf. She's the Chief Research Officer for AWIS, and AWIS stands for Association for Women in Science. At first I read Association of Women in Science, but no, and the for is very important. And she has the lead in a project related to STEM, taking STEM to market, and Advanced Resource and Coordination Network Initiative. Heather? She's also from the USA.
Thank you all for having me here. First, since you brought it up, Eva, I'll explain the difference between of and for in the title of my organization. So the Association for Women in Science is an organization comprised of members who are from all genders, because we think that addressing issues that impact women in science is something that should be engaged in by everyone. It should be everyone's responsibility and not just women's responsibility to address these issues. Eva asked us to talk a little bit about our personal experience, and I can tell you a little bit about my own career trajectory and how it influences why I do the work that I do and how I do the work that I do. So I did my undergraduate in applied mathematics and computer science, and went on to do my master's in computer science, where I focused on human-computer interaction, so the design of technological devices from a usability perspective. So a lot of the technology that you see in this conference center, I had a role in helping design, so using small handheld devices and being able to use those to interact with large displays like we see here today. And a big piece of the work that I did also looked at the role that gender plays in how we design technology. And one of the big studies that was kind of an eye-opener for me when I was pursuing my master's degree was about the design of the original automobile, which I think applies to the context here of Saudi Arabia as we have changing policies on who's allowed to drive. So the original automobile was actually designed by men who are engineers, and it was designed with the proportions of men's bodies in mind. So being able to reach the steering wheel or the gas pedal or the brake, everything that you need to operate the vehicle was designed around the average proportions of men's bodies. And during this initial phase, as women were beginning to drive, they were getting into more accidents than men were, which is where the stereotype of women as bad drivers actually comes from. When it wasn't their fault, it was the technology's fault, because women's proportions were not considered in the design of technology. So a lot of the work that I do actually looks at not just the design of technology, but the design of disciplines, the design of culture, and who's included as we think about what innovation looks like in those spaces. As I was pursuing my master's degree, I experienced a lot of barriers that were related to gender, but also socioeconomic status. I was a first-generation college student coming from a low-income background and didn't have access to a lot of the technology that we were talking about earlier today, where it was assumed that the millennial generation all has almost an inherent knowledge of computing, of handheld technology, when this is not necessarily the case for every neighborhood, every region across the world. People don't have equitable access to technology, and it impacts what they know and how they interact with it. So in the program, I was one among 6% of women who were pursuing degrees in computing at the time, and experienced some hostility about my presence there, and also it was assumed that I was in an administrative role but not in a technical or computing role while I was in the department, and tried to pursue looking at the reasons why that was as someone who's curious by nature and has a research orientation, and found that a lot of what the department was working on at the time was focused on recruiting more girls into computing, but not really any efforts to look at what is going on in the culture when women get there. So that kind of created a shift in my career where I felt like it was unfair to bring more women into a culture where they were not adequately supported and were sometimes treated in a very hostile way, and then dedicated my career to studying women's career pathways and what can we do to support them in their environment. So the work that I do looks at quantitative components, but also I feel like the qualitative is very important. So understanding the stories and the context for people's experiences is important when we come up with solutions. And I'll talk more about this throughout the session this afternoon.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to come back to our assistant minister, who, as part of her portfolio, also is the head of this Human Capabilities Development Program, which is expected to develop education and training systems in the Saudi Arabia Kingdom. And so I think I'd like to hear your views. We've heard about higher education needing to transform and rethink itself. But let's start by how access is gained. And perhaps you could give us some of your views on how we could enable more equitable access for girls to learning opportunities in science, in engineering, and leading them towards innovation, or being involved in innovation, I should say.
Very good. So the program that Eva is talking about has not been launched yet officially, but we have been doing a lot of work for the past almost a year now to develop human capabilities in general, but not only in education and training, but how can we actually align the supply with the demand, what we're training for, what we're educating for, to what the labor market need. But I actually don't like using the word always labor market needs or seeking a job. It's all about creating your own job. One entrepreneur, one small or medium enterprise, one micro enterprise can immediately recruit 3 people immediately. And so we're always talking in this program about the alignments. How can you actually enhance the skills of our students right at the very beginning? And I think that is the secret with this program. We're not talking about now higher education. We're starting really slow and growing. We are starting with the pre-primary education, which is, I believe, in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of the research that I have been reading for the past year to prepare for this program is the most important pillar of education, pre-primary education. Our enrollment rate right now is only 17%, where the OECD average is 84%. we've got a long way to go. And if we want to do it right, we should start right. The impact of having students enrolled at this level, at the pre-primary level, you will see the impact on the economy after actually they graduate from a university and when they are in the labor market. So this is something that we're focusing on. But while actually looking at the research again to understand where our issues are in the education and training today in Saudi Arabia, we've got a lot of challenges. We should not shy away from it. The numbers tell us that we're not doing well, the outcomes are not very good, but at least now we're doing something about it. And we're doing something about it for many reasons. So first of all, we want to improve our outcomes. We want to meet the vision targets and strategies. We want to prepare our nation for the fourth industrial revolution. We cannot stand still today and just be in the receiving seat and wait until a miracle happens for us to be prepared for the fourth industrial revolution, or for 2030 or 2050. And when we were designing this program, we were really looking at 2050 rather than 2030. 2030 is very close. But the skill sets that we need for 2030, we need to start working on them immediately. Now, this is going to be a program that will be announced soon, as I said, but it is the last program, at least in this phase, after introducing 12 programs. The 12 vision realization programs that talks about industry development, that talks about quality of life, that talks about the privatization. It has 12 different programs. All of them are focusing on the new Saudi Arabia. But everyone was wondering, why not start with building the human capabilities program, and why wait after 2 or 3 years to introduce the human capability development now? Well, because we were trying to understand what we need for the future. What are actually the set of skills that we need for the future? What are the jobs that we're going to be seeking to develop for the future? And we always talk about future jobs. I tend to stay away from talking about future jobs because it's actually the future skills that we want to develop and how we can reskill people no matter what new jobs or future jobs avail in the near future or the far future. One technology, one application can completely change the face of jobs in any country. So why not focus on the 21st century skills, and how can we reskill people all the time to get there? Now, I started saying that while we were developing for this program, we tried to do our gap analysis to understand where our shortcomings are. So we know outcomes was a very big problem in all stages, so starting from elementary school to secondary, high school, and vocational, and also in university education. However, one of the things that we've noticed when it comes to STEM, for example, outcomes for females, for the girls in Saudi Arabia, they outperformed the boys by far. There are a gap of 42 points at the 4th grade between boys and girls, where girls actually outperformed the boys in mathematics. It actually is worse in science. It's 79 points. So one standard deviation gap where girls outperform boys, which is the largest gap in the world, actually exists in Saudi Arabia. The other thing is when you look at globally, the number of female students that actually graduate from engineering, science, and technology and from universities, they're around 36%. In Saudi Arabia, it's actually, so girls, 36% of girls who graduate in sciences and technologies from universities globally, while in Saudi Arabia, it's actually much, much more than that. So a lot of girls go into science, technology, and engineering, not so much IT and computer science, which is something that we have to start working on. So keeping all of this into consideration, we know that girls are actually performing better. But then what happens? When you look at the employment of females in Saudi Arabia, we're way below what we should be. Although we're scoring very well, although we're doing very well when we're at the academia level, but when we go out, the jobs, the labor market is not ready for females. Now, what is the reason? Previously, I think the reason is almost gone right now, or we're working on eliminating that issue. But the reason is, you start with policies. If you don't change policies, if you don't change regulations, if you don't change guidelines, nothing is going. You've got to avail the opportunities for them. You've got to deregulate. And then let nature take its time and place, because we're not even saying, as Dr. Haifa just said, we're not saying we want, to avail opportunities only for women. We want to avail opportunities for the most qualified, for the most skilled, for the most credentialed, not only for females. We don't want to end up having also males not having jobs or unemployed. We want to avail equal opportunity for males and females. I'll stop here. We'll let the rest talk. And then
I can't help myself, but I will ask, this is about leadership, and so in my mind, I have to ask, who makes those policies? Who will change those policies that will enable that transition to take place?
the vision of Saudi Arabia. The vision of Saudi Arabia, in every element of it, it has stated how they want to empower women, how they want to avail opportunities and jobs for females, how they want to reduce the unemployment for women. And I can't tell you the amount of effort that is taking place, that I am personally involved in deregulating everything that stops a woman from being empowered or from a discrimination between a man or a woman, unless it is a Sharia law. Everything else is going to change.
Thank you. I think it is, what you're saying is that there is an absolute need for political commitment, and that is the case. But I'm going to ask Haifa to tell us a little bit about what are some of the obstacles that mean that there are still too few women in leadership positions. What are some of the aspects that would have to change for that underrepresentation to be improved?
Although a lot of policy has been changed, especially for accessibility for women to a lot of the jobs, but there are still, even in leadership position, but there are some cultural issues or obstacles that's still on the way. And I think it will be removed gradually, but maybe I can give you some personal experience. I think as a woman in a crowd of men, it is still really an issue. It's for me. It's not for the men around me, maybe, but for me. And this is really what is what's holding some of the women really to prosper or to apply or to be part of this boardrooms and higher position. And so my personal story really started really early days when I went to the U.S. And I went to the first classroom, first lecture. And it was really, it's in a graduate school, and then I was sitting, and then a man, pulling the chair near my chair. So I was just really pulling my chair to the other side, and kept really doing this till the end, and just like, he said what I'm doing, and then I ran out to really go to my husband and say, this man is really coming to my beside me. So this is really important to see this culture still exists. I cannot really tell you that if I really sit on a board full of men, yes, I can really discuss, talk professionally, and I'm not saying this is about the men. The men are really wonderful. They are really our brothers. They are husbands, and they're really supportive, or otherwise I won't be here, because my husband, my brother, all were supportive during my life, either when I went to school or during my working or career. So this is one issue. Sometimes men, sometimes women are really the obstacles in the whole, and the structure of the whole thing. Another thing is really maybe Iman said the policy. I think if similar to the idea of the quota in the Shura Council, it should be part of every board. I'm not saying it should be, but it's a way that really it has to have something to integrate women more, because a woman alone is not, it's not going to help as much as if she's with a cohort. A cohort of women not necessarily is not capable. A lot of women, mashallah, Saudi women are really capable. But if they are really growing together in these leadership positions, it will help a lot other women. So I want to hold the door. If I am really now as a president of a university, I want to prepare the next one. I want to make, and I'm doing that actually, the next one really should be on the pipeline. I should really open the door for her or hold the door for her to make sure that really she's really capable and she's coming to that position. So these are the things maybe I can really shed light on, and maybe later. I don't want to take the whole time for me, okay?
Thank you very much. What you're saying is that women are the true pioneers related to what your minister was saying with regard to all of higher education, being the pioneers. And I think it's the women that need to be the pioneers and have courage to at least initially act as one or two before they can really have the power of the group behind them. But I think that's very, very important. I want to ask Kitty whether she thinks, or if you think, there is a difference between the success rates and the ease of moving into leadership positions between academe and industry in science and engineering. Do you see one sector, university or higher education or research institutes, learning from industry in this respect of promoting women in positions of leadership, and vice versa? Are there things that industry should be learning from higher education institutions?
So I can't speak for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but in the US, there is a distinct difference in many cases between business and higher education academic institutions in terms of the participation of women. Part of it may well be the ability of academic institutions to kind of be creatures of habit of how the institutions have been built, but in some cases, academic institutions have had structures that are sometimes difficult to change. So you see existing structures, for instance, at UC Berkeley in the College of Engineering, 2/3 of the faculty who hold a position in more than one department are female, even though they don't represent by any means the majority of the faculty in engineering at Berkeley. But they come in, they're interested in cross-disciplinary fields, so they choose 2 departments. But means that's 2 departments for tenure, that's 2 departments in terms of publications that are considered appropriate, there's 2 faculty meetings. Would you really want to do that? And so it's a very, let's say, rigid structure. Now, industry has other challenges, but I would argue because of the research that has shown diverse teams impact your bottom line in a positive way, there has been a lot of change in industry in terms of female participation. There's been a lot of growth in a lot of companies. There are still challenges. Places like Google, Amazon, Facebook have had a lot of attention lately to the more senior levels, which is a leadership issue. So there are policies and then there are practices. I think having transparency about what those numbers are is making industry more open to change because they're accountable in the public and to their shareholders. And so I think that there are differences that they can learn back and forth. There was a conversation previously about academic freedom, very important. The U.S. National Academies right now, the National Academy of Science, frankly, is voting on a resolution regarding sexual harassment and whether or not that's considered misconduct, like scientific misconduct, and whether or not you can lose your membership in the academy if you've been accused and found guilty of that. It's a very controversial discussion, but academic freedom, frankly, in some cases, has not always been beneficial to some of the community members. So I would argue that there's things that industry can learn from academia and the academia can learn from industry. What I think is most interesting is some of the smaller partnerships with startups and with innovations and opportunities to share and create structures that are more viable.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Heather a question that has to do with timing. And I'm struck, and I think it's a wise move, that the goals of 2030 with regard to what you were discussing, nurturing better access, have really looked at the horizon of 2050. I think we are in a long-term transformation process rather than a short-term immediate change. So my question to Heather starts from that, because I think we then need to balance the support for immediate change and resources to change and to provide women with immediate support, and balancing that with the long-term vision. So how would you see that in your context?
Sure. So I think meaningful change, systemic change, cultural change does take time, and in some contexts, it happens a little bit more rapidly than others. And a lot of the impact of that has to do with some of the steps that we take in the immediate that add up over time to create a larger scale kind of impact. So the work that we do at the Association for Women in Science is oriented towards systemic change while also providing support for individual action and individual navigation of the system as it currently exists. And the way that we approach that really isn't from women need to change how and who they are, but more providing information so they feel empowered to make decisions in the moment. So for example, I've seen a lot of advice in the startup space that advises women to learn how to pitch more like men, to behave more aggressively in order to woo investors. And we know from the research that even when women engage in those behaviors, they're evaluated negatively. So there's really no winning that can happen when you behave in ways that aren't authentic to yourself. And maybe authentically you do have a more aggressive presentation style, which is okay too. But really teaching them to be aware of how they're being evaluated and to from the very beginning, understand what their goals and their values are, and to be operating in the world with integrity so that their values and their behaviors align. So that's a core to what we do. And as more people engage in that manner, whether it's women or it's men, that adds up to pretty large-scale cultural change.
One of the things that none of you have mentioned, and usually in discussions of issues of women and gender and leadership positions and how to transition to a better place, most conversations come around to we need champions. And I think as we discussed, the scientific committee discussed this panel, I had really thought it would be beneficial to have a man present on the panel, because I am completely convinced that we will not change without changing mindsets and therefore changing our colleagues and partners. So, Heather, can you start with that issue?
Yeah.
What allies, or how do we build allies, and what kind of alliances do we need and support we need from men?
Sure. So from my perspective and from the research that I've done, we know that a lot of the social, cultural barriers that are in the way of women moving into leadership roles, even when it comes to policy, for example, policy is situated within a social and cultural context. How it's implemented has a context to it. And so a lot of that becomes embedded with the worldview that we have, with the experience that we have. And so a big part of allyship development that we engage in is to help people become more aware of what their worldview is and what that perspective is and how it becomes embedded in the questions that we ask and the science that we do. Who it is that we're inviting to be part of our research collaborations, who it is that we're engaging in the boardroom or in our classroom, what impact do the solutions that we come up with or the innovations that we come up with have and on whom? So a lot of what we know in the US, in some of the industrial engineering, for example, the negative impacts that that has are disproportionately held by communities of color. So they have a lot of negative relationships with industrial engineering because it's harmed their communities. And if we don't understand that when we're doing the work as allies, then we can't fully engage and can't fully advocate for the people that we're trying to work alongside.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask both Haifa and Iman, both of you talked about skill sets. Can you touch on a little bit more? What are the skill sets that you think need to be nurtured in women in Saudi Arabia for taking up future leadership positions?
Actually, I was just opening on that page because I didn't want to miss them, because I wrote them all, because that's what we have in our plan that we're trying to develop. We have been working on developing our curriculums for some time right now, but we've never actually touched on the real critical skills that we need for our vision and beyond our vision. The skills that are, changeable, that you can reskill all the time as you move on with time. But with the skills that we talk about, we always talk about critical thinking, we talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about communication and leadership. These are things that you cannot replace with technology, ever. As a matter of fact, you need it more for the new era where technology will take over a lot of the jobs, but they will take over a lot of jobs, but will create a lot more of these jobs that are needed in leadership and skills like STEM, for example, and others. But design thinking is something that we also talk about a lot in our new strategy for developing education and training. We talk about a lot innovation in designs. We talk about emotional intelligence. We talk about global understanding and creating our global citizen by starting with our global student. And this is something that we're definitely putting a lot of effort and a lot of initiatives to target these skills. Risk-taking and tolerance for failure, because if you are to prepare your future generation to be job creators, not job seekers, they will have to take the risk and fail and have to take another risk and fail. But you also have to set up some models for them to show them how they became successful after so many failures so they don't get disappointed. Basic skills like communication, as I said, and self-learning skill is also very, very important. And we're trying to inject this right at the very beginning. We always say that you teach little kids how to read up until 3rd grade, but then you teach them what to read. And then you continue with this until they graduate from life, from even college. And I always try to say we will work on developing the STEAM, not STEAM, but STREAM. I want to include reading until they graduate from high school and even include it in the university programs, as well as art. You want a well-rounded personality rather than just people talking and working on STEM alone.
Thank you. And Haifa, focusing more on the higher education aspect of this.
I think is very important really to see how, what are the workplace, the needs, from the different skills. But the most important things is really the lifelong learning. For me, I see that, lifelong learning is, if I instill this passion in anyone, then acquiring learning in any kind of skills sets that needed is available in different kind of forms and shapes. Either MOOCs, or I go to class, or I go to training, but instilling this lifelong learning as an important skill, it's very important. So this is what we usually work on in ERFET University. It's part of the liberal art education that everybody's really aspire to. When we say American style of higher education, we always say because of the liberal art education formula that it has, and that's why I think the lifelong learning is really an important pillars out of it. So we did not really learn how to pitch for the investors. we did not learn in high school or in higher education. But, or we did not learn even computer at the time that I was really in high school or in, yes, no, I'm just saying this is very important. I learned the 86 was the first time for me, which is really when it came. So we were really on the typewriters, and so we acquired this because the love of learning is something really instilled, okay, in us. So this is a very important, really, skill that really we need to acquire.
Okay. And before I turn the floor to you, so please start thinking up your questions. I'm going to ask the last question to Kitty, but it really, I will ask each of you to think about it, because we haven't addressed it at all. And that is why? Why should women be part of the workforce? Why should we want them in our leadership boards? Why are we discussing this? What are the benefits? And on the contrary, what do we lose when we do not include women in positions of decision-making, of leadership? So Kitty, you start, but each of you can comment on that at the end as well.
So I will start at a micro level and then go to the macro. I'm a mother of one daughter and two sons. One son was actually born in Riyadh 20 years ago in Al Mashari Hospital. And I seek a life for them. And I think we have to care about, all of you have siblings or parents or children, and I think we have to think about our ambitions for our children, but also that we want our world to be better. And we want to grow, but we want it to be sustainable. And I think the interesting thing about why we want women to be involved, if you think about when you're doing research for science, if there was a whole biodiversity ecosystem and you only looked at the land and you didn't look at the water, the air, and you're trying to solve the solutions, and there was resources there that could make it work so much better and be productive for everyone. And I see women as part of the solution. I see men and women working together. I don't think this is a men versus women at all, but I think the fact that we have culturally women bring their own styles to leadership, and that's exactly appropriate, but we need all the resources we can, all the talent we can, to really struggle with some of the challenges we have. And frankly, the US is behind in many of these conversations, and we need to learn from all of you. So we want this to be a global activity so we can share those successes.
Thank you very much. And I think we have a half an hour for discussion with you, and I see a first hand right away, which is terrific, and I will keep my eyes open for the next question. Thank you so much.
My name is Majid Al-Ghamishi. I'm an investor, and I thank all the panelists, since they are now leaders in their organization as we see them. So the title is missing engineering. You just say women in science and entrepreneurship without engineering. I don't know, maybe Catherine is. She's the only one. She mentioned excellence, as I sense. And there is an organizational excellence. And I don't know if anybody is aware of that or not, because engineering, organizational excellence is a criteria with the tools, and has to be designed, the business model for each organization according to the business excellence. This is first. Second, when we are talking about entrepreneurship and innovation, this is the most risky business on earth. In entrepreneurship, the statistics says only 10% is passed and 90% is failed. It means bankrupt. And in Saudi Arabia, 30% is passed. When we come to innovation in science and in advanced technologies, so we have patents. Research has been done in producing patents, and that must be a return on investment. And in the world patents industry, in the States, for example, 5% is commercialized. In Korea is 6%. It's again, the technology readiness level is the most risky business. We have 9 levels, and the level 4 till 6, they call it the Death Valley. So who is taking care to invest in such kind of advanced technologies or technologies as an innovation entrepreneurship? Third, for the ladies or for the women, when we see the history, the most important thing in economy is the stock market. And when we see the first stock market in the world, it is an Amsterdam stock market since the beginning of the 17th century, 16 or something. And the contribution of the women in the board is now 7% after 400 years. And the European Union, they are putting a target that at 2024, they are seeking that the contribution of the women in the stock market, in the board, they will reach 20%, but there is a law, there is no quota. Let's go in Saudi Arabia. Dr. Iman, you mentioned that you want to meet the ladies and facilitate all these things. We have 179 companies in the market, in Saudi market. Average 7 in the board. So we are talking 1,400. So how many ladies they are in the board as a board members? 1%? I doubt, maybe less. 1/3 of that market is owned by a Saudi sovereignty fund. So why not there is a program will be designed for a high caliber ladies with corporate governors and other issues to be appointed in that market. Within, I think, 5 years, they can have 30% of the whole Saudi market by women. This is another thing. Third, you are talking about the IT. We have almost 40 universities. I know that Faisal University in the southern province, one of the big universities, they have 40,000. One of their colleges is the College of Computer Science. They have 47 professors at different levels, and they have 570 plus students, all females, no male. Thank you.
Thank you very much for both your comment and your question, but also for your policy advice, which I think should be heard by the policy makers. Would any of you like to comment? No? Yes,
I can
please.
say
Yeah, I was just waiting.
Go ahead.
First of all, the policy change is music to my ears. By all means, we are going to support this. But let's just, just look back 3 years ago. What we were and what we are today. When women were allowed to drive a year ago, there was zero incidents. The society is so ready for women's participation in the workforce, in the community, in universities, in education, in the labor workforce, everywhere. No one had actually stopped us or said anything against all the changes that are positively happening for women. And I can tell you it is extremely positive. I'm a female. I'm working with a lot of other females in the field, and it just happens to be that my workforce that are working in my office happens to be 50% of them females. So we go for credentials, skills, and we select the best. And we talked about how can we encourage more females in participation in general. It's actually diversification is important, not only in gender but also in cultures. I'm a very big believer of that. So that diversification brings a lot of favors in. What are we doing in terms of policies? A lot. You will hear very soon, I think within the next 2 months or so, a lot of changes. I mean, we have actually reviewed all the laws and the policies and the different articles in the laws that have any discrimination between men and women in all government entities. And we've identified those, we've selected them. We've actually wrote a full description of how we can change those. We're sending it to the highest authority in the Kingdom, SIDA. And there's a huge move that all of these policies are going to change. Now, we are unleashing those potentials and opportunities for females. Females then should participate more. No one is going to come and beg you to come and work. You've got to show yourself. You've got to be confident. You've got to come forward and apply for the right jobs. You've got to come for the Small and Medium Enterprise Authority and apply for your loan to start your own business, to become an entrepreneur. No one, the system is so inviting right now. It has not happened before in the past. And everybody knows I'm not a big bragger, and I actually don't, say things that are not happening. I lead also one of the hats that I'm wearing, a committee that is called, Taysir, which is making things easier and faster for the investors to come and invest. And we have one of our committees is for empowering women in business. We fight with the World Bank every day for how they evaluate us and how they look at us, and I don't like it. And I've formed a team, and I went to Washington to say, why did you actually score us and label us this way as the lowest scoring country in the world for women, business, and the law? The report, it is not acceptable. We're not going to put our heads down anymore and say, yes, you're right, they're not right, and they've got to stop doing that. One of the things that they have in the Doing Business report, where they ranked Saudi Arabia as 92, and one of the reasons why they did that is because there is a gender discrimination for a woman opening a business. That is absolutely not true. A woman can go out and open her business without taking permission from any man, and we are going to stop this perception that women are not being treated fairly and women are not taking lead of what their lives should look like, where their jobs should look like. I have been having all the freedom since I was little to go. I studied in Harvard, I studied in Bristol University. I'm a scientist, I'm a geneticist. No one had stopped me. I went forward and I went and looked for the career that I always wanted to have for myself. When I came back, I worked hard. It is all about hard work too. I worked very hard. I reached here because I had sweated to get to this position. And I'm very proud that my country has given me the opportunity. And so we should not really neglect that now. We should not be crying all the time that we are not taking our rights. We are.
Thank you. This is why we need to come to Saudi Arabia. I have microphone 6, and then 3, and then this gentleman down here, and then 1 here. So please.
Thank you very much, panel. My name is Susan Rowland. I'm from the University of Queensland in Australia. Hello. This is my first visit to Saudi Arabia. I'm a guest of the Ministry of Education, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity to come. It's been eye-opening. I'm very impressed with the investment that you're making in education, particularly in education of women and girls. This is a question for Ayman and Haifa. I notice that you've both been able to access international education. And I'm interested to know whether you think now in the changing Saudi Arabia, whether access to international education as a university student or as a university graduate is of value to Saudi women, how it is of value. And I'd also like to get your ideas on how Saudi women can be of value to international education systems. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think since we started at universities, really we value our international partner. We have almost 25 partnerships all over the world. And we don't deal with them as like, yes, we have your curriculum and we install it in EFET and then we teach it. No. Our partnership, we see ourselves equal because we want really to benefit from each other. So we send students for a study abroad. They send some of their students to stay in EFET because we want them to get also the life of Saudi women. So we host them even in our residence. So this kind of intercultural is one of the benefit of what we're doing. Another thing is really the education, a different perspective, which is really important for our life here. We want to know, or we want to practice what we call, the other's perspective, not only what we do. This is very important really to feed into the students while they're really studying. They have to see the other perspective because without it, they will not be able really to tolerate, to respect, to all of this. And the third element of the internationalization, I think with all of our effort that we're doing is for higher education, is we are all facilitator. We cannot be anymore a traditional teacher or a faculty. So with what we call, as some of our partners, which we call them Global Liberal Arts Alliances, all over America and the world, we usually do like a course connection. So co-teaching is very important to show early on in the lecture format. So if we do like a co-teaching, two faculty from different parts of the world really teach one class, and each one of us really doing it differently, then the student really takes that different perspective really hands-on immediately. And we practice this every day in FET with our Global Liberal Arts Alliances.
Thank you. Emma, would you like to add?
Just one thing. In our new program that we will launch soon, we actually have considered definitely still scholarships to send our students outside. And I'm a very big fan of this. I'm going to keep on pushing that forever, because it's not only about the science or the technology that you will learn from an outside university or an elite university. It's actually much bigger than that. It's just going and experiencing the world. It's just getting used to other cultures and being open, being that real global citizen. That's what we're trying to create. But at the same time, we do want to exchange students and faculty from other countries, because it just enriches the whole experience. And that's what we're trying to do. And the whole world is a very small city right now. We're all connected, whether we like it or not. We want to feel that connection with the rest of the world. We want to encourage our students to think globally, to be open-minded, to feel and touch and learn about other cultures, other religions, other habits. It is absolutely something that we want to encourage in our society, 100%.
Thank you. Number 3, and then...
Hi, I'm Professor Hania Naqash, Dean of Graduate Studies and Research from Beirut Arab University, Lebanon. To answer your question, Eva, why should we be involved in leadership or in work? Well, we are part of society, and some women have capabilities and skills, so why not make use of it? And we are multitask, so we can do our best, and there are very much successful women. So society should make best of us. I know there is gender differences. It's all over the world, but of different percentages. With a bit of encouragement and removal or abolishment of constraints, we will do better. We are excellent leaders at home and will be excellent leaders in our work. Thank you.
It was a rhetorical question, but thank you so much for answering it. But I also think that we talked about teamwork and the need for teamwork in innovation. The other aspect of what is necessary for innovation is diversity. If we do not have diverse members in the team, we're not going to be as innovative. And that means also having gender diversity. So absolutely. Please. This gentleman.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the panelists. My name is Hussam Zaman. I'm the president of Taif University. And I have 2 comments, actually, in the topic that has been discussed here. The first one is about the importance of the deregulation, the policy review, related to women empowerment in leadership positions. But I think also we need to look at the practice, because many times we have a very naturalized policies and laws that has no kind of discrimination against women, but in the practice it hasn't been done to involve women in leadership positions. Let me give an example about the higher education charter in Saudi Arabia. It has been there for more than 25 years. All the leadership position in that charter has very naturalized, very neutral statement, has nothing to say about the dean or the vice president, or the department chair should be male or female. But in the practice of over the last 3 decades, we have been seeing only male in the dean position and vice dean for female position in the girls section. So I think we need to look at the practice, and I like the idea and the experiment actually we have that Dr. Haifa mentioned in having some quota exposed sometimes in some boards, in some committees, that specific quota has to be devoted for women as kind of affirmative action, we can say. The second point also, I think it's related to the role of female leaders in promoting and empowering women in leadership positions, particularly in a society that has been gone through gender segregation for a long time. Many of the leadership position is by appointment. The leaders, they don't know enough about the good candidate, particularly from the female population in an organization or university. So the involvement of female leaders in promoting and encouraging potential leaders from the female I think it's very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comment. Would you like to respond?
I would like to just echo that practice is very, very important in addition to process or policies. The National Academies did a report looking at 6 disciplines, including civil engineering, electrical engineering, biology, chemistry, physics, and mathematics, at all the research-intensive universities in the US. And we looked at tenure and tenure-track positions. And what we found is the actual pool. We actually looked at who was at the pool, who could be applicants for those positions, who was interviewed, and who was hired. And we found that the actual process and the practice started at the pool, and actually who was included in that. And when your communities are somewhat segregated, how you reach out and find those candidates is so important. So there's been a lot of efforts made to be more thoughtful about the process of how you recruit, how you engage, and there's been a lot of research done on how you can do more effectively on that. And I think that's where champions can become very important, and having that external validation. So having the experience overseas or having an opportunity to do a postdoc elsewhere gives you an ability to have a visibility that can help you in that. But I would agree with you very much, practice is critical.
Thank you. I have one comment here and then you. Please.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Abir Bar. I'm from the Prince Mohammed bin Salman College of Business and Entrepreneurship. More of what your opinion would be on from a student affairs practitioner's perspective. So I deal with the students, and they come to me at a time where they're at the crossroads of trying to decide what kind of future they want. And then they are also subjected to stories of where there are challenges to be the first, the struggles that happen. How do you overcome that and encourage them so they don't go into this seems to be a very difficult thing, I'm just going to take the easy way out. No, I know I'm smart, but I'm going to find where the road has already been paved. So, and what kind of words of encouragement would you have for those students?
Heather?
Yeah, so I found that in speaking with students who are trying to decide what their career pathway might be or what they want to major in, or even if they want to pursue entrepreneurship, for example. A lot of times we think that hiding some of those stories about the barriers is the better way to do it so that they're not discouraged. But if we are really open and honest about that and also share some strategies for how to navigate that and provide a support network as part of it, then it's actually really empowering, because when you start to encounter these kinds of things, you don't then take them personally because you can see them in the systemic context. So if you're going through as the first person who's a woman in your program and you encounter some of these things, you start to think, what's wrong with me? What did I do? Or how am I messing up? And then when you understand that there's a bigger picture there and that there are other people who have also experienced what you've experienced and they've made it through it, then it changes the way that you relate to some of the challenges that you encounter. So I would say being a little transparent about the challenges and then also offering up support so that they have someone to turn to when they encounter it so that they don't feel like they're alone.
Thank you. Anyone else commenting on?
I think I'll add the networking bit, which is, you shed some light on it, but networking is very important to teach students early on, because this is where we're not taught how to network, because, but network in a collaborative way. So you can really make a pressure with a very structured way to get what you need to do. So a help to the students, at the same time, tell her this is the way that you need to structure yourself before you really request anything. It's not really an easy way to go out to the world without having something really solid. That's very important.
Thank you. I think this will be our last question, because then I will invite all of you to give us your final thoughts after this session. So,
First of all, this is Walid al-Somali from the Saudi Arabian National Oil Company, Saudi Aramco. Thank you very much for the distinguished panelists for extremely very insightful and thought-provoking statements. I have a brief statement and a question for the panelists. Number one, I feel extremely very happy coming from the industrial world about Catherine saying that we have made significant strides when it comes to diversity versus academia. This is good news for us in business and industry. In fact, we see many corporations around the world, they have this new position called Chief Diversity Officer, which reports directly to the CEO of that corporation. So thank you very much for that kind of support. The brief statement I truly would like to pass to our academic partners in the country and also our business partners in the kingdom as well, to work together to establish an onboarding program for the effective onboarding and assimilation of these young ladies graduating from universities to go to the workforce. Cultural understanding of organization is extremely important component of the success or failure of any graduate. So I think there is a good opportunity for the corporate world here, working closely with their academic counterparts, to come with creative onboarding programs for these young ladies, expose them to the culture of doing business and what norms and what expectations are set for their success. This will be extremely very helpful. So the question that I have for the distinguished panelists, now we hear the term in industry and business quite often, the glass ceiling term. I mean, with all the advancement made in diversity, women empowerment, and women development, does this term has any meaning now or not? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your offer to instigate an innovative program to prepare women for board positions. I hope that's going to be taken up. With respect to the glass ceiling, comments, ladies?
Absolutely exists. I think, you know, part of it is acknowledging that we have a growing participation of women, as cited, which is tremendous here and elsewhere. But if you actually even look at the US, and when we did our report at the academies, believe it or not, the departments that had the fewest representation of women at the high level overall percentages were biology and chemistry. And women have been participating in biology and getting PhDs in the US at 40% for decades. So I think we have to look at that there may be issues around participation, and then there are issues around career progression. And some of those may be individual choices, but I would say there have been traditionally some structural issues that we need to address. And I would encourage us to think, Olin this past year did something that was novel. When we hired faculty, we actually brought the faculty candidates in as a team, introduced them to each other because we team teach, and said, here is the pool, you may be hired. Stanford recently in the School of Engineering, instead of saying, here is the candidate we're looking for with all these criteria, said we're going to do a broad call because we know there may be many people we're missing. So I think part of it may go back to what are the criteria we demand of our leaders, and do those criteria sometimes have a gender component that actually impacts who are seen as viable leaders.
That goes to his
I can add to that. During early days, when women started really working here in Saudi Arabia, I I thought when I came and started working, it's not the glass ceiling. We didn't have glass ceiling, we had brick ceiling. And then I said, okay, and then I see walls between men and women in most of the conferences. I say, my terminology is different. My terminology is brick ceiling and glass walls. So these are the stuff now, it's not anymore. It's with this new vision, okay, you see women and men sitting in the same room. You see a lot of, I see the ceiling now, but I cannot go at this moment because this is the leadership position that as gender, okay, as it's available for men, but not available till now for me as a woman. It's very important, okay, terminology for us as female, because it's not just literally what it means, it's really what it conveys, the meaning behind it, the interpretation behind it. I can see different kind of position going back and forth, up on the sky, but I cannot really touch it. I can see it.
Yeah, I would agree with what's been said so far, and also the language of glass ceiling kind of puts the responsibility on women to break through it. And I think it should be a dual responsibility between women and men, where positions of leadership are offered to women and women are supported in going into those kinds of roles. There's also a phenomenon within the US that's known as the glass cliff. And it's where women are put into leadership positions in companies that are failing. And so that way, when the company fails, these women are actually the ones who are seen as responsible for it failing. And so that's something that we're up against. I'd also like to add a comment on when you were mentioning the onboarding process into the corporate world for women, making that bi-directional, I think would be really important too. So not just cultural training for women on understanding how business works and how the culture of an organization is, but having some of that training also for the organization to better incorporate women within that culture and their perspectives into that culture as well. And then you have a more well-rounded picture for both parties.
So just the onboarding a bit, because this I think is a very important question. I think it's not a matter of putting a program to onboard women or men. I think it should start from high school, where all students should get used to going out and working in this. We don't have this culture, unfortunately, in Saudi Arabia. Working in the summer, working in any job, having this connection and relationship between schools, universities, and vocational colleges, between them and the private sector, understanding the needs of the private sector and injecting all these students within the private sector for apprenticeship programs and training. And it should be mandatory before they graduate to get that type of training. That will immediately onboard them, or at least prepare them better for the workforce before they graduate. And this is something, again, that we're considering in our program.
Thank you. I was going to start my introductory comments to this session by saying something that I can now use to answer your question with regard to the glass ceiling. I think when we stop having panel sessions on how to improve gender positions in higher education or industry, the glass ceiling will have disappeared. Until that happens, we still need these kinds of discussions and mutual learning so that we can remove it for our daughters and for our sons, because I think both will benefit a great deal. I think we've almost run out of time, but I would like to give the panelists a last 3 or 4 minutes each, if they want to, make some final comments. So I'll start with Heather.
Great. The last thing that I think that I would add is that within the context of the U.S., we know, and Kitty alluded to this at the beginning, that within industry, when women are founding and leading their own companies, we know that they have higher success rates, yet at the same time, and higher return on investment. Yet at the same time, despite this, there's very little funding given to companies that are founded by women. So within the US, it's only 2% of all venture capital that's given to these innovations. There are barriers to women being able to receive patents for their intellectual property. There are even barriers in angel capital. And at the same time, in my own work, within the STEM disciplines, we know that within the US, many men are seeking out entrepreneurship because of the financial opportunity that's there. And it's true that they have greater financial opportunity. And women are actually seeking entrepreneurship when they do because of cultural issues that they're experiencing in other career pathways. So for example, in academic faculty routes or in our national labs, and they feel like there's not as much autonomy for them to shape their research portfolio or the kinds of questions that they're asking and how they're going about answering those questions. So they seek entrepreneurship as a pathway to having greater autonomy and the ability to claim leadership roles. And so even looking at why people try to go in the direction that they go in is really important, I think, for us as we continue this conversation on how to better support women as they seek STEM careers and as they seek entrepreneurship as a pathway within a STEM career.
Okay. Thank you. Haifa?
I'll end with an optimistic view about Saudi female and how it is really, the environment now is fertile for them. And I think the new generation and the current generation, including me, okay, it's very important to take every step, okay, they need to take in order really to take the opportunities that they have. Especially if they're entrepreneurs, if they're scientists, if they're researchers, if they're humanists, so, or artists, it's the environment is really available for them, and it's nothing really will stop them except their work. So if they are not really willing, if they don't have the passion, then they will not achieve. But I think the environment now is ready for every single person, of woman, I mean, to really to excel in any kind.
Thank you.
I guess for the first time in this panel discussion, I'm going to talk as a government authority in the stage. And what I want to end up this conversation with is a promise. A promise that within the Ministry of Commerce and Investment, we are going to avail the opportunities for women. We're going to push very hard for them to get into the business and start their own small or medium enterprises or micro, and whatever it takes, we are going to support that, and we've already started, but we're going to push harder. From another perspective, where I spoke about the committee that is responsible for easing the business environment, there's another promise that we are going to also facilitate and deregulate whatever it takes to help women start their own business or to start a career or to get the proper education that they need. So we are going to work on removing all these obstacles. And from an education perspective, we have built a program that I think Saudi Arabia will be proud of, where we have availed also all opportunities for males and females, but specifically for females as well, to also open up, all the other disciplines or majors that they have not been lucky enough to have in the past few years, as well as make sure that the labor market also is ready to receive these females in their proper positions in the future. So that's a promise that we are going to work on, hopefully, and I hope I see you every day, every year, and then every year I'm going to update you with what we've done with this promise. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I think I would say all our efforts have to have a framework of excellence and equity. They have to be together. If we don't have that framework, we won't be successful. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, don't assume that we know what our women scientists and engineers need. I mean, one of the first tenets of design thinking is you do needs assessment. And IBM for many years had all these affinity groups, and they kept doing what that worked 10 years ago. And then they realized they had to have a conversation with their computer scientists and engineers. What do you need now? because things change. And so I think we have to engage the community we want to serve and make sure that they're part of that conversation. And there's not going to be one model of what works. When Genentech, where I had many friends and many members of the NAE, National Academy of Engineering, were there, was bought out by Roche, there was a huge concern. Here is a Swiss hierarchical company buying a San Francisco blue jean, very flat, very non-organized company. And there was a lot of concern about how those two cultures would work. And I remember having conversations with the heads of Roche, and they said, no, we don't understand how Genentech works, but we know it works, and we want to learn from it. So have models that may be different, and I would encourage, in the efforts you do, to take risks. Not everything is going to work, but make sure you're being intentional and that you have ways of actually looking and having the data to show that you have goals and targets. And I think it's exciting. And I look forward to the change that would happen.
Thank you very much. Let me thank all 4 panelists for inspiring and thoughtful and informative comments. I also would like to thank the audience for asking and making very useful suggestions. I think the notion that we do need to take risks and learn how to deal with failures is a very sound one. I think that's something that does stop us from being innovative and moving forward. I also heard almost everyone say how important networks are. And I think this event, like many other events, is an ideal opportunity to create networks that are supportive, that are open, and that are maintained. We have the technology, so that are maintained when we get on our airplanes or our trains, buses, and automobiles. So use these opportunities to network, because being pioneers, as these 4 women have been, is not easy. And it does need assistance, collaboration, and I think we made a move towards that in our panel. So thank you very much, all of you.